capable of seeing and processing information from as far away as themselves. The collective loves a cheerful giver, as long as what he contributes is for the benefit of the continuing myopia of them all. And if you want to be so charitable, no need to worry about how to go about it. All you have to do is do what you normally feel inclined to do. Life loves a cheerful giver to collective consciousness. He's a good example to the other prisoners. The peril of staying local and self-centered in your thinking is that everything that happens to you, rather than becoming material for fresh study and further understanding, becomes just another personal anecdote to tell. All of the body's interests are self-centered, and properly so. Same also for an ordinary man's mind. But when it comes to discovering the secret of what's actually going on in this game of life, there will be no joy in Mudville as long as you are the batter that you're pitching to. Man's fascination with outer space and other worlds is an unrefined reflection of the need to get outside one's own mental sphere to ever get a useful view of one's native position. To be conscious of the mind is to not be merely reactive mentally, but active. After undertaking the great struggle, and oftentimes falling lax, one man, as a warning, put himself on notice. And when that didn't work, put himself on another notice. "Take that, you rat bastard," declared he. One man says he is at a total loss to understand why people pay good money for counseling and psychiatric treatment when they have their own paid-for mind, which is just as crazy, dumb, unruly, and perfunctorily intelligent as anyone else. One man announced, "I am a professional. I don't have to know what I'm doing." Same sort of thing your mind's already pulled on you. The mystical warfare and words. The problem with nailing down, identifying, and naming a problem is that you then tend to squander and dissipate your energies too specifically thereon. Your labeling of the problem and continued repetition of its name in reference thereto becomes an accepted substitute for any real assault thereon. The mind believes, and I'm quoting now what the mind believes. Right here. Once we're just able to talk about something, we're making progress. But the alert must take good note that the mind can sit in Paris dreaming of Turkish travels and be quite satisfied without ever going anywhere. To the collective, a double-barreled bonus, but for the few, a potential misdirection that must be continually considered. To be conscious of the mind is to be more deliberate and less out of control. Less out of your mind, even. A certain king found a nest of traitors in the bosom of court. Want to know what he did about it? Huh? Men invented fiction in the feeble attempt to conjure up something more fantastic than life itself. Note, only the ordinary believe they've succeeded. Bill Foles and the Enlightenment, round 2. The more conscious, and I mean the really more conscious, carry no ID, and I mean inner dialogue. Thank you, Rex. It's become Rex the Wonderfoot instead of Rex the Wonder Horse. Or at least one part of a horse. As long as he was on drugs, one man didn't care what happened to him. And when he was on drugs, the things that generally happened to him were the kinds of things that he wouldn't care for at all when he was not on drugs. Now, after hearing this story told aloud, he adds the comment, if there is some moral to this, he does not repeat. He does not want to know what it is. Okay, let's do it over. As long as he was on drugs, this one man didn't care what happened to him. And when he was on drugs, the things that generally happened to him are the kinds of things that he wouldn't care for at all when he was not on them. Now, can you perceive of thee mind as a drug? One man thought he was demon-possessed, then realized it was just his thoughts. Standing by the dock, a boy asked, "Papa, why can a ship sail into the wind but not a mind into itself?" No one's story is ever told until they tell it. Then it's everybody's story, just as it was to begin with. To be conscious of the mind is to no longer be so mechanical and automatic. The 4 stages of a mystic, according to one bathroom wall. I'm quoting. I want to be a mystic. Do I look like a mystic to you? Why can't all of you see that I am a mystic? And finally, a mystic? Me, a mystic? What the hell is a mystic? Flesh as often as needed. If you accept your mind's analyzation and description of what life is about, you live in a dream world, whether awake or in bed. But if you live primarily in your mind, it doesn't matter. The great thing about being ordinary is that you got nothing to sweat. And it's kind of a shame that the ordinary can't ever realize this. Of course, then on the other hand, if you do realize it, then you've got a whole new level of sweating to do. As the spaceship rocketed from the launch pad, someone was heard to say, "I'm not so sure now that I want to go." And you being the insightful crowd that you are, I won't bother relating what someone else's response was. The metaphor and reality of suicide is the ultimate and final defense. One man bought a gun, kept a knife, and stored some poison. And as a backup, had a book of philosophy and an electric guitar. Life will stand for almost anything except a mouse holding up the sky, a tree trying to take its leave, a wave instructing CPR, and a man attempting to do almost anything unexpected, like trying to stand up to life with metaphorical threats of suicide. Yet another way to tell you're civilized is if your mind will struggle for survival with an intensity rivaling that of the body's. Those who have seen life directly, however, are no longer interested in this local, illusionary life and death matter. If the mind didn't have anything to worry about, it'd have to worry about making it till tomorrow. There was once a man who discovered an ugly creature in his backyard. And after pondering for a while what to do about it, he asked the creature if it would go away if he quit thinking about it. And you guys, being the insightful devils that you are, I won't insult your insightfulness by telling you what the creature said in reply. To be conscious of the mind is to not be at its immediate mercy. After a night of hard drinking and speeded up tinker-toy thinking, one man would sometimes say, "The inside of my head tastes damn near as bad as the inside of my mouth." His brother says the moral of this probably is that under certain conditions you should keep both your mouth and mind shut, though he admits he's not really sure. Wolves run with wolves and lions run with lions, but minds will run with anybody. And the simple amongst the crowd sighs thanks for the mind's apparent lack of any discrimination. In the web of collective consciousness, everyone's thoughts are dancing with everyone else's thoughts. You ever notice that dramatics and cheap gestures and choreography adds nothing to this? I have. to my chagrin. I have found that out. The useless seriousness of which I speak is in mentally taking one thing to be more important than any other. That traffic is traffic and traffic is traffic is a truth unknown to the common mind. Acting in ordinary ways and ordinary affairs is quite all right, but will get you nowhere in matters extraordinary. There are no support groups to join for the expansion of consciousness. Help, cried a fish, I'm out here alone. What's wrong with you, fool? Can't you see life all around you? To be conscious of the mind is to alter the tempo of time. To be conscious of the mind is to be more conscious. Compared to what everybody else says about their existence, there's something kind of, different about the mystically inclined. They see being more conscious is the only thing that will make their life better. There is but one system for the development of consciousness worth mentioning. And the system is you. A man found a wondrous object that he could carry with him, and ultimately discovered that the steadier he held it, the more wondrous it became. Choreography of the eyes. That's a lesson hard learned in life, that if something doesn't work just because you refine it and make it more subtle, it can be a fool's attempt or expectation that it will then work. Perhaps you would like for me to rephrase that. Perhaps I can't. I'm going to try to get you to consider sort of two things together. The peril of staying local and self-centered in your thinking is that everything that happens to you, rather than becoming material for a fresh study and further understanding, even enlightenment, becomes just another personal anecdote. The idea about being self-centered, again, has fallen. You can take that has fallen from the reality of what it was into the mythology of what it first was called, written about, and now has fallen into absolute disrespect in that it's now considered to be of a religious or moral basis. And it's not the origins of it. Self-centered thought has nothing to do with what common etiquette, all religious ideas about the need to be humble. Self-centered thought, the danger is, to a few, is the actual electrochemical reality of limiting your view to this. The ordinary have to explain what happened to them in life. Any aspect that seems to be worthy of comment, that seems to be worthy of retelling, is always on the basis of them turning it into a personal anecdote of some sort. This is one of the areas, again, that is so blunt and so plain, but it is so common. It is like you have walked the face of the earth so long with your mind that to try to point out that there's dirt there, that the mind goes, yeah, so. The mind cannot, under ordinary conditions, think without it being self-centered, without it being based on self-reference. All right, I'll tell from life a personal anecdote, not mine, life's, ordinary people. So maybe this will get a crack for you to get your toes or fingers in. As it so happens, just today, here goes Baptist minister time. Just today, as we're taping this, there is a well-known public figure, celebrity, recently was involved in an accident that rendered him all but dead. And he has been laying in a hospital working off life support systems for 2 weeks. He begins to make some recovery, they announced today, that now he shows some signs of being able to breathe on his own. He opens an eye. The press immediately rushes to the hospital. They didn't have to corner her. his wife comes out and makes a statement. And she thanks everybody for their kind support and their prayers and etc. And talks about what a real guy is and how she has faith in him. And there's no doubt, though. Now remember, here's a man laying, and he just barely can breathe every now and then on his own. That's his miraculous. They may take him off some of the life supports, and she's saying, but he's a fighter. But there's no doubt about it. And she looks right in the camera. Nice looking woman, just not picking on her, but she looks right in the camera and says, but there's no doubt about it. The man is in for the fight and challenge of his life. I mean, he's in for it. And then immediately, without missing a beat, she goes, of course it's been one for me too. And her face kind of looks pained. Now, did I do it well enough for you to understand? There, her dear beloved husband is one hair's breadth away, or one plug into an AC outlet from death. And she's talking about what a hardship this has certainly been. I mean, it's going to be on him. It's going to be the challenge of, it's going to be the hardship, the challenge of his life, because it's certainly been to mine. And you think, well, bless. Now, we're being theatrically sarcastic for a second. I'm trying to get you a crack to see what goes on. Under ordinary conditions, if anybody paid any attention to that, it sounds as a loving wife. She's there with him. She makes some comment, the faith she has in him. She speaks highly of his fighting spirit. But her final comment, the wrap-up, is what a hardship it's been on her for the last 2 weeks. There the son of a bitch is dying, but her final comment, the coda, the punchline is, well, I know it's been the fight of my life. I mean, you know what? She had to stay off of work, miss the soap operas, miss some sleep, eat hospital food. You understand? Now, as all regular viewers know, we don't have any regular viewers. As all regular viewers know, this is not an attack on that woman. It's not an attack on the family. And it is not some attack on people as being unthinking, uncaring rat bastards, as he said. He said that. It is the fact. What else was a person? It was like she could not leave. And I'm just using her as a great example. That there it was on TV, her face right up there, the nice talking head, and her looking pain, showing all the right kind of emotions. Write it up for a minute when she talked about what a fighter he was, and then look real serious though and hurt when she says, of course, he needs that kind of fighting spirit because he is in now for the fight of his life. But I know it's been for me up until now. Boom. It seems as though, and she's fairly common in this, you can hear it amongst people, it's ordinary people, that it has to wrap up that you give some personal point of view. That you in some way, I could even take, if I was trying to defend ordinary behavior and ordinary consciousness, I could even take the view of using the example I've just selected and say, well, a person should do that. If she had just stopped about what a fighter he was and how they appreciate all the help and the cards and the letters and everybody's praying for him, but he's a real fighter and it'll come in handy because by God he's got the fight of his life, that you could have stopped there. That her comment didn't add anything. But then if I wanted to take an opposing position, what I want you to see that it is quite respectable amongst ordinary affairs, that it added something for her to put herself into it, to at least show that she's not just there as some sort of plastic mouthpiece, that their marriage may have been estranged, that she may not even care that much, that she just made those comments. A doctor could have made those comments. But then I could say, well, she needed to. People need to put themselves into the comments. That she says, I know it's been a challenge for me, and I'll be right there with him. The point of me trying to make it sarcastic to start with is for you to see that the mind ordinarily, even in matters, let's assume that she is just madly in love with him, that their relationship is as close as can be, and that she is just heartbroken, that she is about to die herself. But notice, it is like she has to verbally, the mind, when I say like, the mind's already done it, but she has to verbally place herself into the context. And the reason is that that's how the ordinary mind looks at everything, is from that area of it being self-centered. Not that it's wrong, not that it's immoral, not that it's irreligious. But the mind ordinarily is what I keep referring to personal anecdotes, which I mean a lot more than that. as I keep trying to hint, or thinking locally, taking examples. Anytime you take an example, you're either a scientist or a fool, and they're not, of course, mutually exclusive. But a man who doesn't understand anything must use examples. And so you always end up locally that you have to use an example. Scientists do it. They're used to it. They can, of course, explain their way out by saying, well, science is not, even the hard sciences, is not necessarily a permanent art in the sense that any theory, any law we now have developed is incapable of being refined, revised. And so they've always got that way out. But if you'll notice, even with science, they will continue to put themselves into the observation. I knew that would help a lot. Back to non-scientific affairs. The mind ordinarily looks at everything on the basis of what do I think about it. It does not analyze it, but all thought, the reason I'm trying to get you to consider the difference between thinking and some other level of consciousness, kind of consciousness sans comment, consciousness that is not dependent upon the inner dialogue. The inner dialogue, there's a reason that it's inner in you. There's a reason that we have the word I. There's a reason that people feel as though they should take things personally. When, as I said, you can get people momentarily to admit somebody can be whining about something in life. And you can get them to admit, what's happened to you isn't all that bad. Because look at it this way, you're going to die. And they go, well, that's true. And you go, plus the things that happen to us, the worst thing that happens to us is physical, death. And they go, yeah. You say, and between here and death, the worst thing, all you're worried about now is you're behind in a car note, or that your girlfriend may leave you, or something like that. He goes, yeah. And you go say, well, think about right now. What if you found out you were dying of cancer? Then would not this pale in comparison? And people don't like that to hear that stuff, but if you could make them believe they were being engaged in some en passant philosophical discussion, they might go, well, yeah, if I was dying of cancer, you're right, who'd care if I lose my car? I mean, if I'm going to die of cancer, I can't drive anyway. But all right, you get that level, but you can't take it any farther with ordinary mind and say, well, now let's go into the area. Forget comparing it to physical ailments and how they would, in comparison thereto, be of no consequence, or of much less consequence than you now attribute thereto. And he goes, yeah, but you can't get an ordinary person to go any further than that and say, wait a minute, if you'll agree to that, then look at it this way. Everything the mind takes as being important is kind of a joke. It's kind of, it's almost like a verbal facade. It is like a kind of ad hoc importance to keep the conversation going. I guess I could be simpler than that. But if you just told people, all right, if you'll agree that compared to having a fatal disease and you being behind your car note is nothing. Yeah, you're right. If I had a fatal disease, if I found that as much as been driving me crazy losing my car, but you're right, if right now I had a pain and ended up in an emergency ward and they said, you're having a heart attack or we found brain cancer and you're going to probably die shortly. You're right. I wouldn't even think about my car again. Nothing. It's gone. Let them come tow it away. They don't have to wait in the middle of the night. Come take it. Take everything I got. But then if you say, well, not just the car, in comparison to a physical ailment, what if you took everything that the mind thinks and selects as being important in your life, and that you did not have the need to compare it to something and say, well, in comparison, it's not very significant. What if you could see, or can you consider that none of it's significant? Then you got serious lack of attention. You have a serious need for Johann Sebastian to show up and rewrite Sleepers Awake, because everybody go, or the coffee cantata. Take your choice. The whole idea, to apply it mentally, to do with enlightenment or liberation of the mind, liberation of consciousness, all of that, the awakening of consciousness to another level, all of that, etc., I could describe on the basis of what we're discussing now, if I made it clear enough. That's known as FC. fat chance. If I made it clear enough up until now, then you could describe the process of being enlightened as no longer being self-centered mentally. This is so obvious, I repeat, that it's almost problematic in value to discuss it verbally, which is why you very seldom hear or read it discussed in that manner. Because if you tell the mind, if you said you're self-centered, that you look at everything not egotistically, not greedily, not in some way that is disreputable, not in some way that is condemnable. It's just that everything that you see is on the basis that you're in the center of the universe, and the mind, the ordinary mind, that's the only view it has. And therefore, without any sort of qualitative, moral judgment, it is a distortion. That you do not take in information, even scientists. There's the only reason I threw in that clarifying exception or clarifying side road, right? FC squared. If you tell the mind that there's a built-in distortion when you're thinking from you being the center of everything, the mind cannot even do anything with that. You're back to that same old problem. It's like telling a man, well, you would be more conscious, you would understand more if you would not stand on the soles of your feet. That I will give you my guarantee. What the hell are you going to do with that? Nothing. There's nothing you can do. You can pick up one and look at the bottom of the sole of your foot and think, well, what does that mean? And you think, well, maybe I got the wrong foot. And you try the other one, and then you don't see anything. And then if you're really sharp, you think, wait a minute. The significance is moving from one foot to the other. That is, every time I flick my left one, whatever the secret is I should be seeing, it moves to the right. There's nowhere you can go with it. To tell the mind to say, the trouble is with you is everything you look at from your view. And any sane man's mind's going to go, would you give me a break? What can it do with it? But what I was trying to give you also was a backhanded, like an outline, sort of a connect the dots and bring out the background is why. I've asked you rhetorically of late already, but why and from whence cometh this great cry, morally, civilly, religiously, for the absolute unconditional deed for a man to be humble? What's the point? And what I said that went from a kind of scientific reality at one time, a nonverbal understanding from the first mystic, the first strains of life genetically in man trying to grow at an abnormal rate, which was the first mystic. It went from there to mythology and then to be taken literally, that man should be humble. And as all collective wisdom, proverbial wisdom, truisms, they're all based upon something, or they would not be remembered. They would not be remembered to the point of becoming trite or truisms. Let's leave it at that. Things that just people repeat. To say that a man should be humble, any sane person on the planet, that seems to strike a very favorable chord, or contraire. No sane person will stand up and say that's not true. They can't. You cannot stand up and say, no, it'd be better if we were all more vain. It'd be better if we were all more self-centered and just real pushy and prideful. You just can't do it. Nobody can. It is based upon a reality, but now the reality, as always, ends up when it passes the point of the original blunt reality of it, the blunt, non-verbal reality of it, into mythology, and after mythology is when it falls into the public vernacular, into the public mental vernacular, that now people say, as I'm pointing out, that people will hear the truism that we should be humble. We should be more humble. Even if you're humble, you should be more humble. And everybody's system goes, every sane person goes, you can't do otherwise. Well, what does it mean? It now seems to be behavior, as everything ends up being once you get past the mythological stage. But the mid-stage between its origins, and let's say that mythology was the mid-stage, is when, if you can back up a little bit and begin to think metaphorically instead of listen to what's going on out in the public marketplace verbally, is the very thing that this news I was talking about, is when things happen in life you can no longer, or you cannot, study them directly. You do not learn anything fresh about them. It is seen from the same old self-centered view, and they simply become a new personal anecdote to talk about or to think about, to repeat. Because if you could move back past the literal telling of whatever it was, man should be humble. If you move back and you were not self-centered, if you could think in a way that was not self-centered and local, and not in examples, which is what a personal anecdote is. If you're the mind will have to pick out examples to prove why it agrees with what it heard or why it disagrees. To get back to the metaphorical stage, just the mid stage, is to at least get beyond that. Because a metaphor, if you're dealing with it correctly, is like a bridge between the silence of Eden and then the God's telling Adam and Eve, get the hell out. You're on your own. Now you can think. It's somewhere between the halcyon days of silence, nice sex, free food, good weather. Every day was a weekend. Between that, whatever time it took, and God going, out, you're on your own. Between there was we could call it, or I will, the metaphorical period. So if you can go from the time that Adam and Eve left the garden, which is the intellect got fired up enough for them to think. And somewhere in the middle of that would have been metaphorical. Now back to example, they're driven out of the garden, and very shortly one of them comes up with the idea, or they find it written on a bathroom wall, man should be humble. And by then, they're off on their own, and to be off on your own away from God, in the true sense, is that now you're listening to the noise and hear. Of course, listening to noise and hear is the first time that men came up with the idea of God anyway. But we don't want to make it any more complicated than it is, do we? CF. That's fat backwards. Yes. Or compare fats. That the metaphorical of be humble. That once Adam and Eve were driven from the reality, the silent consciousness of God, speaking metaphorically, to being separated from God. That is, you're now on your own, tootsies, out of here. That the metaphor, when they got out of there, and one of the first things was, be humble. Because once you're on your own, you got to grow. Once man had an intellect, he was dissatisfied in a way that could not be satisfied. That now you had a hunger beyond sex and food and comfort and physical survival. He now had the hunger to mentally grow. And he was on his own. Because God said, all right, I gave you the word, I got the intellect going, out of here. And one of the first things was a man should be humble. And everybody since then has responded favorably. As I said, you cannot do otherwise. Yes, that would be good. Nobody asks why. Nobody analyzes it, because once it reaches that literal level, everything is taken. If you respond to it and it's become a truism, it sounds right to you, you don't question it. That is damn near impossible. You just go, well, it's true. That's why they call it a truism. Or the person will, if you say, well, what the hell does it mean? Everybody says, yes, you should be humble, and if you're humble, you should be more humble, that you can't be too humble. And the person says, well, that's true. Even if they say, well, I'm not humble enough, but it's true. And you say, well, explain it. Why? And nobody can. They won't even try. If they're religious, of course, they'll point, well, read right there in chapter so-and-so. And if they're not religious, and you press it for a couple more times, well, tell me why. Tell me, I'll mention it. Why? Why should you be humble? Explain it to me. Anybody in a secular vein, a psychiatrist, an ordinary person, you push them much further with it. Are you crazy? Which is a real hard-hitting response always. Is to ask people, why do you do so-and-so? Why do you agree to that? Why do you support that? And they go, well, it's self-evident. Well, okay, you say that, but would you explain why is it good to be humble? Just give me a hint. Give me something. I don't understand it. Well, it's just, all right, if you're real prideful and, no, I don't give me an example. Explain to me, analyze, just give me your version of why it is good to be humble. Don't give me personal anecdotes. Don't start telling me. Because that's what they'll do at first. And if he goes, well, you just should. You go, no, explain. Tell me why. All they can do is, well, you're being funny, or you're nuts, you're crazy. And nobody even ever considers that as an important message, or it could be. It's why cannot men defend the reality that they present as being reality and being worthy of defense. The models and paradigms that they have adopted of how a man should live, how he should think, what he should do, and none of it will stand up to why. And of course, we reach love now tone between you and I. It's not supposed to stand up. But people do not ordinarily even consider that won't stand up and find that interesting. Because if you're self-centered, you don't find anything interesting. Oh, you'll say you do, but you say, well, why do you find it interesting? And they'll go, well, all right, I'll tell you, because something happened to me 2 months. And you go, no. Tell me why that is interesting. Don't tell me about why you. Tell me why it's interesting. What is it in there? What's inherent in whatever happened that we're talking about that is of interest? And they go, well, haven't you ever? And I said, no, don't drag me into it. Now, I'm not going to be part of the personal act, though. Tell me why that's interesting. Tell me why we should do that. Well, my uncle, no. There is nowhere to go with it. Back to what have been the metaphor of being humble. It would have been in the middle, kind of a transitional period, if you can back up away from the literal truism or the literalness that is accepted as true, that a man should be humble. No one can explain it. No one can analyze it. No one can tell you why. They just know it's true. All right, between there, people not being able to explain it, but accepting it as a reality. Back to wherever it started, what the chemical, what the electrical, what the physical basis of it is. Somewhere in the middle there is what I was going to call a transitional period where it turned into a myth, where it was metaphorically, where it was parabolically put into words originally. Nobody will even go back that far, but if you went back that far, then you would have to ask yourself. Yes, you would, because I'll insist on it. You'd have to ask yourself, okay, now that I've gone halfway back, what's the whole purpose? From whence cometh the idea? I didn't know you were Old English. From whence cometh the idea that a man should be humble? Because if a man were humble, he could think better. If a man were not self-centered, he could put the mind to wider use. Of course, if you could drag ordinary minds back halfway that far and tell them that, they would still feel like, well, what if you're right? I can hardly put it to use now. What the hell am I going to do? That's not what they'd say. Their idea with most people would be, well, listen, my mind's as busy as I need it now. I don't need anything else. I know. It was where, by the way, the kind of principles about work will expand to fit the time available, and that there is no vacuum, that if there's a vacuum anywhere, that nature will fill it up with something. Exactly. Do you ever, is there any record, I ask rhetorically, knowing the answer full well, is there any record anywhere of a legitimate psychiatrist, I mean one that didn't graduate from night school, or a psychologist reporting, a counselor reporting that a man or woman showed up complaining that their mind was not active enough, that they were getting annoyed, kind of irritated, that just lots of times, sometimes constantly. I mean, they'll lay down in bed at night. I mean, it's time to go to bed, and they turn off the lights and lay there, and their mind doesn't do much. They can just be walking along the street or out for a jog or driving on a long trip, and they just begin to notice it's beginning to worry them, and they thought they probably should seek professional help. That they'll notice sometimes as they go periods of time, God knows how long, it frightens them to think about it, that just like their mind just kind of doesn't do much of anything. Doctor, I need help. There is no such complaint. Every man's mind is like a Lincoln Tunnel, a Washington Tunnel. It is big enough, whatever size your mind is, as soon as you begin to think, it is just absolutely bumper-to-bumper traffic. So to tell a man, to insinuate, if you could drag him back and say, well, if you could back up a little bit, if we could get somewhere between the origins of the mind, the origins of the human intellect, and where we are now operating verbally, literally, which has gone fine. If you're satisfied with it, don't let me intrude. But for those who might not be, they'd like to consider something else. And I say, all right, if we could drag you back that far, and you could consider that if you did not take things literal now, if you could begin to see that they had a basis that was, shall we charitably say, not exactly as they appear to be now. That is, humility was based not upon some trying to avoid offending the gods, trying to live according to some particular religious belief, that it had to do with the fact that if you were, what humility really means, if you were humble, you could use the mind better. The point is, if I could drag somebody back to that far, they would say, I don't need my mind working better. And they got you. Because you can't say, yes, you do. They go, no, I don't. Of course, then you're big as idiot as they are. But you can't prove to somebody, well, you should be using your mind better or more. That's what, I tried to avoid that because that's too easy. Again, it's some of the beautiful justice of life, by the way. If you'll follow it for 1 second, I can't resist. You notice I've been saying that if you could get an ordinary man to agree, or if you tried to say, do you realize if you listen to me or tried a certain trick, if you did so and so, there's a way you can make your mind work better. You notice I kept doing that, and I didn't say work more. I ended up sort of talking around the edges. But here's the justice of it. Work better, they can kind of shrug off and not even get involved with. But if you say work more, they will immediately. They got you. Which is what I was hinting at the back door about once your mind is opened up in the tunnel, traffic's going. To tell a man, listen, stick with me or take this course or buy my tapes and your mind will work more. I would not have, this sort of activity would not have zero audience. We would now be in debt to the great Roper organization or whoever it is, telethon. Some way we would owe them because you'd lose even more people to say, well, hey, you listen to this and take what I'm saying to heart and all the hints I'm giving and your mind will work more. People go, God, turn that thing off. Because nobody wants it to work more. Think about it. The very thing that would be the easiest to describe to say work more rather than say work better, because you tell somebody, well, listen to me, listen to these ideas and your mind will work better. They can argue that, and they will. All sorts of things. I mean, we can go to it forever. They can go, well, who are you to say it works better? You don't know how my mind works. My mind works better than yours. What's your education? I got no complaint with the way it works. You understand? They can leave with a certain kind of dignity. They can leave, in fact, believing that they bested you in a legitimate argument over their mind worked better. But to tell them the more direct description, hey, your mind can work more. Abject, point blank, immediate dismissal. I don't want to work more. Even if you're correct, forget it, and they'll leave. That didn't take but 2 minutes. So you waste 2 minutes going to the bathroom when you don't need to, checking your hair. So I thought you might see that life doesn't go around trying to protect itself. I know I keep saying it. It's just once you begin to see the equations, once you begin to see this invisible at the level of a periodic table, you look down and you think, I have been periodically under the table. And trying to look out through this peephole, and the peephole be me. All right, consider, after all this, consider the way I put it to you. What if you tried to describe yourself or somebody tried to come up with a description? How could you describe to the mind that it should not think from its own viewpoint? Now, I know unless you're in a slightly altered, slightly unusual state of consciousness right this second, or you have the ability to manhandle your mind a bit, which some of you do by now, after listening to this so long, even if whether you ever thought about it, some of you now, you can sit around and if you told the truth, to yourself, you go, well, I can't say that I'm more conscious right now. I can't say I'm enlightened right this second. But you do know that you have kind of browbeated and manipulated and fooled around with your mind so much that you can now do things that your mind didn't really want to do or wouldn't ordinarily do. So that was what I was asking you, is try and at least do that. And right now, consider that if you tell the mind, any sane mind, if you say you would understand a lot more, you'd be better off if you would not look at everything from just your view. Philosophically, at the edges of intellectual theory, this will be given some passing credence. I'm not the first person to have ever said that. Some of the earliest philosophers, east and west and everywhere, and continue to. Psychologists. People attempt to use, but just anecdotally and locally, is to say, well, in certain areas or in a certain example, some philosopher will say to a student or some somebody will say to somebody else that you would understand you would understand, let us say, the world monetary system, the complex intertwining, the interdependence of all the imports and the worldwide money system, the world of commerce, if you would not. Now, I'm just saying this to you right now. If you want to understand how the world money system works, don't just sit there. This is one guy, maybe a banker or a professor of economics, telling a student, if you really want to understand what you asked me, don't keep telling me examples that your uncle has some money or invested some money in the money markets and they exchange yen for Deutschmarks, and you can't understand why when the lira went up, the Deutschmark went sideways and you lost your Toyota. And the kid goes, yeah, but it did happen. The professor says, yeah, but listen, if you really want to understand, we're assuming the student asks me a question like, I don't understand how this happened, or I invested money and I tried to play the international money market and things happened over in Afghanistan and somebody ended up in Singapore, and 2 hours later I checked in with my broker and he said I'd lost everything. And it makes no sense. I mean, I wasn't in that market. And I told him, and the professor says, all right, but you get away from just your self-centered view for a second. You got to look at the bigger picture. You understand? People, that does happen in life, but it's always anecdotal. It's always on a specific example. It's always locally. It's always personally. That somebody trying to tell you something will say, well, wait a minute. You got to look at this in a wider view, just for a moment. Now, I know you've been hurt, you lost money, but now if you really want to know how that sort of thing could happen, how a change in the monetary system in Afghanistan could affect you losing your money when you had no money invested even on that continent, then listen to me a second and quit whining. Quit telling me you lost money. I understand that, but if you want to have some idea, any chance of you grasping how this operates, shut up a minute. Listen to me. That happens. As I said, there have been plenty of philosophers that have even opined at some length that we would be better off if men had a worldwide view, if we did not focus just on our religion, on just, if we're Western, just Western philosophy, just Western culture. We should take in other views and not just be that parochial, that chauvinistic, that we just look at things from our view. And people go, well, our students at least go well to pass Philosophy 101. And as I said, under some conditions, a person will entertain that in a very ephemeral, damn near theoretical way. That, yeah, I guess so. And then they forget it. But again, if something is, yeah, I guess so. Think about it. As startling as that is, that you could get somebody. Well, how about my example? They're whining and they say they don't understand how they lost money because of something that happened in the so-called Afghan stock market, which operates out of somebody's back room in a bar, how that made them lose all their money put in a brokerage house in New York. And they say, you do understand if you don't get over your whining and you being so entangled with you losing the money, if you really want to know what happened, you've got to at least lay that aside for a second. And people, intelligent, ordinary people go, you're right. I want to know. Now, I'll go back to worrying about this and whether I'm going to sue that broker or not later. But yeah, I do want to know. So in a sense, people know, and it's astounding. They just don't see it as astounding. That they can take operations, the automatic, sane, predictable, expected operations of their mind. That is, I lost money because of some kind of cockamamie, something that happened. That's my money. Sure, I take it personally. I want to know what the hell happened. I want to know. And finally, the guy says, listen, you came to ask me. I'm an expert in economics. I can explain to you. I can't stop your money from being lost, and I can't, make you feel better. But if you won't know, shut the hell up and listen to me. And people know. Okay, I do want to know. I'll go back to being mad in a minute. Tell me quick. They do know that they can take the normal operations of their mind, their nervous system, and can set aside and listen to something damn near objectively. I'm saying damn near coevally compared to what they were doing. That is, they can stop, they can hinder this self-centered view of their mind only operating from I'm right here, and the only thing that interests me in life, I'm sane, I'm ordinary. What would interest me unless it affects me? There's nothing wrong with that. That's sane. But they do not see that they can set that aside under very specific conditions for a very short length of time, that they can go, all right, I'll calm down. Explain it to me. I do want to know. And they can stop it. They can lay it aside for a second, and they do not see that as extraordinary. It is absolutely extraordinary. Well, the potential that reflects is extraordinary to a few people. And not just that you can get over always being upset by what happens to life. That's not the point either. The point is that physically what happens in life will upset you, because it'll eventually kill you. And most people's body, if they're sane up to the final thing, their body is upset about dying. Well, the mind tells it. The body doesn't know, but most people's body has been around their mind, most of their life. And so therefore, when they're dying and a man's mind knows it, the body has, shall we say, grave, at least nonverbal suspicions that something funny is going on. And a nice healthy man's body will fight dying. The mind cannot, outside that kind of condition, the mind cannot see that although what goes on in life affects everybody, and that the body says, quite so, I am the center of the universe. I am the center of my universe. It doesn't talk, of course, but it looks after itself as the whole basis of so-called animal survival instincts, as we've talked about in a theoretical, humorous way. That if were it not for the mind, that we would do the same as animals, that the big wolf would take the food. The big lion would eat what he wanted, and all the smaller lions that already had their ass whipped before, the women and children, would stand aside until the big dog ate, and then they would all fall upon it. That's the way things would still be. That is the proper way of the body, if man was simply the body. The mind, for it to take everything as being related to me, to my survival, at the ordinary level is proper. That's the only way it holds together. If ordinary people believe that, I've tried to get you to see it, all kinds of other examples, but if ordinary people, if their mind would suddenly realize, hey, I'm not the center of what goes on in life, they would be back to the level suddenly, assuming their mind kept going, they would now be an uncivilized, dangerous, feral, just a savage with a mind, perhaps with a college education. But they would be back then to, if they realize, well, what my mind perceives as being important, it's a circus, it's a merry-go-round, it's a carnival. It's why that there is no beginning and end to a dictionary everywhere I look. It's only my mind that says, well, one thing's more important than the other. That if it wasn't that, if they were suddenly left with that, if I'm giving a fair detailing and suddenly I could go and make that happen, people would just simply we'd be surrounded now. It'd be dangerous to go outside. We'd be living in the midst of savagery again, except people would have higher class weapons than Attila did, and would have people who could curse you in probably foreign languages or with a Oxford accent before they attacked you. But nonetheless, the mind then would have no discrimination whatsoever. It would not find anything to be of any more importance than the other. It would not have a self-centered view. But with ordinary people, it would accomplish nothing. If you're trying to accomplish something outside what ordinarily takes place, and remember to get along with what ordinarily takes place, you don't have to do anything. All you got to do is do what you're doing. Read new books. Think new thoughts. But you don't have to do anything. The only use for the mind, for somebody trying to get off the porch, the only use for the mind of somebody trying to do whatever the hell this is to realize that you have got to be conscious of what the mind is, and the mind is not you. And everything that the mind says now, everything that the mind has always said to you, it's the same thing. My example, my picture is as good as any. You've got 6 million porches on this planet, assuming that all 6 million people were genetically sound up here. You've got 6 million porches. Everybody's born on a porch, and there's one flow of traffic. I mean, it's the flow of traffic without limits. It is an infinite flow of traffic, and everybody's got 6 million porches on which they're born and stuck, and everybody's looking at the same traffic. But the closest person to you, your best friend, your twin brother, sister, your mother, right next door, not even a driveway between the houses, she's still on her porch, and you're still on your porch. You can be so close that you think she's the only person in the world that understands me. Well, nearly. But you don't understand you. As long as you're looking from your porch, everything that happens in life becomes simply fodder for a new personal anecdote. And I was being somewhat charitable with that. It's either that or it becomes a new complaint, which most personal anecdotes in some way are a complaint, a whine. But that which happens to a man, once you get past the age, once you leave the Garden of Eden, once you go, Daddy, Mama, and they go, this little Hubert can talk, you're out of the garden. At least shortly thereafter when they say, all right, now you can talk, so I want you to understand this. No means, throwing food in Mommy's face. No. And you tried to look like Adam did when God said, have you been? And Adam went, Which is kind of hard for a 40-year-old man to look kind of naive and like. But once your parents, they did the same thing. That is life, but they did the same thing. Like, listen, I know you can talk. It might have taken a few weeks, few months from Dad to I won't, that. And they go, now you can talk. Now you listen to me. Then you have started them that everything that you hear from now on out, what happens to you, you take as being personally directed. You take it from a self-centered view, and you can no longer learn anything. I shouldn't say no longer, but you cannot learn from it. People do not learn from what happens to them. They take what happens to them, and if it does seem to be something new, well, let's say it is something new, that for the first time in your life you do lose your car. Your business fails, and the first time in your life they come to your house, or they foreclose on your house. Something extraordinary happens in life, something that is actually worthy of a man's. He got no choice but to notice it. I'm not going to tell you what a man should learn from losing his house or his car or whatever. That's not the point. But you do understand a man does not learn anything from it. It becomes grist for a new personal anecdote after he gets through whining and crying about it. But assuming that there was something to be learned, which you can always assume there's something to be learned, if not about foreclosure, about you, that's after you get over worrying about traffic out there and realize the real traffic's in here. But you don't learn from anything. As long as your mind is looking at it from its view, whatever it is, and it doesn't matter who you are, from its porch, from your view, whatever you're looking at, you cannot, learn anything from. It simply becomes fodder for new personal anecdotes. Because to learn, to gain personally from something, is nonverbal. To gain from it cannot have anything to do with you. Not because it's sinful. You've got to be truly humble. That is, you've got to be able to think without you doing the thinking. You are truly a scientist. That's all the Buddhas and the Confucius and Laos and Zoroasters were. They were real scientists. The rest of these clowns are just dressed up like and playing mommy and daddy. Because a real scientist, you simply see what's going on. No offense to our scientists, but a real scientist wouldn't write down what happened. He wouldn't apply for a prize. If he told anybody, he wouldn't say that. He wouldn't sign his name to it. That's being able to see. Do we have a smoke detector acting up, or is somebody's